will represent our dear speakers and their background to understand more like context of our conversation. And one more time, if our internet audience have question, please, I see here our chat. So you can write your question to Zoom chat, or if you're here in audience, you can just like ask question directly. So I think we will be ready for questions, right? And we'll put like 10 minutes for questions. So my name is Kateryna Odarchenko. I'm originally founder of SSC Group consulting company. We work with elections, campaign management, government relations, and lobbying. And we represent mostly like clients from Eastern Europe and Central Asia here in the United States, and clients from United States in those regions. And I'm also board member of IGAPA, which work here in the United States as part of 501c3 Institute for Democracy and Development. And that's why my role also to develop our community, and please join our community, and we will be happy also if you will support us in our fundraising efforts. So you can find our Stripe on our website and social. With us today, Mr. Stephen Blank, one of the most honored experts here in Washington, D.C. He internationally recognized expert on Russian foreign defense policy, international relations across former Soviet Union. He is also leading expert in European and Asian security, including energy issues. And originally he have much more experience, like for 2 pages. But you can Google his articles on The Hill, Atlantic Council, Hudson, and subscribe to his like very deep dive and analytical work. Charlene Stanbury, Vice President of Government Relations at National Association of Broadcasters. She joined this association after serving Chief of Staff for Congresswoman Clarkey from New York, for whom she previously served as legislative director. So government relations work from both sides. And she also adjunct professor at Florida International University, honor college teaching there for Washington, D.C. seminar course. So you with Paolo also colleagues. You're in perfect place. Tai Mallory, thank you for joining us today. She an experienced senior political advisor and public service professional, skilled in civil rights, social justice, advocacy, community organizing, government relations, public engagement, political campaigns. So also all related fields which we start our forum. And she also work as in consultancy for non-profit organizations and advocacy group. And evaluate support underrepresented groups. So we in this company today, as I understand, this panel will be fully offline. If I understand not right, I will ask our European office to mention it to me. Today our panel is our name of our panel is Insights from Lobbying and Government Relations. And we will talk about tools and regulations. The first question will be to Mrs. Stanbury. It's very basic question. So we all interested in how associations works, and your association is one of the biggest association, and it's very good aims. So if we talk about lobbying of tobacco or alcohol, it's no very big pleasure to talk about that. But when we talk about broadcasters, it's like good example. So can you provide some history of your association, how you built association, and maybe some case study from your work? I think it will be interesting both for American audience and of course for European audience as well. So floor is yours. And if you want to add something more to your bio, also please to do so. Thank you for joining one more time.
Absolutely. Just wanted to say thank you for having me this morning. As she mentioned before, I work for the National Association of Broadcasters. So we serve as the voice for America's radio and TV broadcasters, local radio and TV broadcasters across the country. Just last year, we celebrated our centennial celebration when it comes to broadcasting. So our member companies are everything from, if you hear of iHeartRadio, any network that owns broadcast stations that includes ABC, Fox, Paramount, CBS, and also NBC. I think that, some of the key issues that have been important to broadcasting, so to speak, have been keeping AM radio in cars. Because as you know, there are a lot of new EVs and a lot of vehicles that don't want to have AVs. They want to monetize their dashboard. And so from a public safety perspective, AM radio is very important for all the public alerts that you get and also the public programming that's mandated by the Federal Communications Commission for broadcast stations to have. Another issue that is important to us is just also about protecting and making sure we get grants for our local journalism newsrooms and for the people who are doing the hard work to get the message out in regards to what's happening across the country. And it's going to be very particularly important during this election season in 2024. And another issue that is very important to us is also AI. And I think that's something that affects everyone across the globe, wherever you are. AI has very positive implications when it comes to broadcasting as far as allowing us to do script writing. And also there could be some negative implications when it comes to deep fakes and, some of our journalists possibly being modified or switched or changed in regards to what they're saying, using their likeness and their voice. So there are a lot of issues that are important to the National Association of Broadcasters. We are one of the biggest trade associations here in Washington, D.C. We do have a large PAC. I know that in the previous discussion we talked about political action committees. And we are influential on Capitol Hill from a bipartisan and a bicameral standpoint. So that means, we lobby both Democrats and Republicans, both on the House and the Senate side, because we think that it's very important just to get our message out there. So, our trade association is just our general members who may be local mom and pop radio or TV stations, or they could be the big affiliate networks that own broadcast stations.
How long do you exist? So you have pretty long history, right?
Yeah, so it's been about 100 years.
100, yeah, so pretty big experience, yeah, right? Some more than independence of some countries which members of IGAPA. Can you, second question to you, what's the case this year for your advocacy was the most actual and maybe general understanding how you give solution for your members in this case? So as I understand it was IE, but can you talk 1 minute about what it was particularly and how you work with that?
Absolutely. So I think I'm actually going to use AM radio as a perfect example of something that happened. So earlier this year, Ford announced that they were going to take AM radio out of cars. And what ended up happening is Senator Ed Markey and Senator Ted Cruz, so you kind of see that bipartisan standpoint, both wrote letters to Ford. And then also on the House side, you had Representative Josh Gottheimer and Representative Tom Keene, who also wrote letters to Ford. And what ended up happening is they created a piece of legislation called AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act. And so that bill actually, to this day, has garnered over 230 co-sponsors, both in the House side and on the Senate side, we're hitting up to 50. And it's been an issue that the way that we tackled it is making sure not only do we have a piece of legislation that's that action item that members of Congress can sign on to show that they support that AM radio is important for every vehicle to be in every car, especially for their constituents. And then also we have been having different events when it comes to AM radio to talk about the importance. So we have had panels and forums on Capitol Hill. Actually, just last week, the National Association of Broadcasters, we had our fly-in. So we had over 500 broadcasters from the country come in to actually lobby and talk to the legislators about the importance of keeping AM radio in their vehicles. So if you can kind of see, there's different tactics that we use, whether it's having a piece of legislation, whether it's that grassroots that they talked about in previous panel, part of having actual broadcasters, local broadcasters that come in and tell their stories, and then also that educational component, whether it means having panels and having forums.
Mhm. And so, is it you have final solution on this bill? So it's already voted, right?
So we are trying to get it to a vote on the floor.
I see.
Yeah,
So you're
yeah.
still in process.
We're
So
still in process.
Good place to report.
Hopefully in a couple
Yeah.
weeks we'll
Yeah.
have a vote on the House or the Senate floor.
I see. So it's very fresh case, So very interesting to discuss fresh case because sometimes on conferences people said, "Oh, let's see our case from 1990s." Like, yeah, it's very interesting, but still. Okay, so let's move into Mrs. Mallory, and also you have a lot of experience in civil rights movements, social justice, underrepresented groups. So also, I have two questions to you. Firstly, what challenges do you see in this sector? Because obviously it's very easy to be government relations professional for tobacco industry, for insurance industry, for pharmaceutical industry, because it's like over financed, right? And it's hard to do advocacy because it's always fundraising problems. So what challenges do you see, how you fight with these challenges, and maybe also you can represent some case, like fresh case from now or from last year, which can teach our audience, good advocacy practices.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so very much for allowing me to be a part of your conversation today. I'm just a baby lobbyist that only lobbies in Virginia. So to be a part of an international government affairs forum is quite the honor for me. I am Tae Mallory, and I call myself kind of a hybrid of a government political professional, political consultant, advocacy consultant, do-gooder in chief, just all around working to advance the issues and the goals that I feel like are important to me, and I center that in my work. I kind of operate in the intersection of social justice and civil rights, having grown up and working in what I consider to be the preeminent civil rights organization in this country, the NAACP. Full disclosure, I'm not here in that capacity today. I'm just speaking about my experience. But since I was a teenager, I was involved in this organization and in college and as a young adult. And it was my work in the organization as a young adult, a community organizer, that I parlayed into a work into politics. And I went in Virginia and I worked for several political campaigns. I worked for a political party, worked on a governor's race, lieutenant governor's race, several congressional races, and state house races. And as a result of one of those races, I was offered a job in the office of a U.S. Senator where I worked for 8 years. And now I'm back. I'm out of campaigns. I've hit campaign retirement age. And I've come out of government, and now I'm using all the skills that I learned in political campaigns and government to advocate for social justice. You might ask, what is social justice? For me, the definition of that is just balancing or advancing the lives and equity for people who have been historically underrepresented and under-resourced in this country. In my particular case, African Americans or the descendants of African slaves, or of enslaved Africans in this country. And I don't have to go into the history of that. To directly answer your question in regard to challenges, because we do heart work, H-E-A-R-T, heart work, and this is a very passionate line of work, and so people become very, very passionate about the work that we are doing, and so we are sometimes able to channel that passion into getting people to help work for us, but it doesn't always follow the resources. You need people on the ground. You need people in communities talking, and you cannot build an advocacy army, if you will, just based on volunteer hours. You need resources to pay people full-time to go into communities, talk to people, gather the data, then use that data to create policy, and then we advance that policy in our state houses, which is what I've been doing. You talk about fresh cases. One of the things that we did this past General Assembly session, Virginia went into session for 60 days, January, February. We just ended on Saturday. So had this conference been last week, I wouldn't have been able to be here, but I'm so glad it's this week. Some of the issues that we focus on heavily are voting rights and advocating for that. And as a part of the work that the group has been doing, we found that a lot of our voters becoming disenfranchised due to disinformation, becoming disenfranchised because they're getting bad information from our voter registration agency, or also they're just getting, again, just misinformation. So we work very, very hard to make sure that we push this legislature to reinstate certain systems that help us to verify voters accurately so that people are not erroneously removed from our voter rolls. We worked hard to make sure that we continue the expansion of voting hours, and we have an early vote period in Virginia, and there was an effort to try to pull that back, and we was like, no. I said, once we can early vote for 45 days, we don't want to come back on that. We want to keep the advances that we continue to have. And that's just in one area. We're also working in prison reform, we're working in incarceration reform, policing reform, and what have you. And I'll stop there.
I have some additional questions. How, if we talk about Virginia, which pretty good for representation, how much people you usually have as staff and how much is volunteer when you try to advocate some issue on state level? So some numbers.
I would say that this organization is pretty much an all-volunteer army, and we ramp up and ramp down based on the period of time. Obviously, we're going into an active elective year, and so we're going to probably ramp up with folks that are in the field that are actively going to be registering voters. Now, I'm talking about the organizing side right now, not the lobby side. For lobbying, that's a whole other operation that we do in the beginning part of the year, and I run a group of, again, volunteer army to advocate. So we're doing phone calls and writing emails and showing up in person at the State House.
I see. So, but how? Okay, for lobbying, I think it's 3-4 people, right, who have some skills for that. But for grassroots campaign in Virginia, how much usually? 50 people, 100 people, 500 people?
Well, we work with a broad coalition of, I'll just say, progressive organizations, and I would say no, all together is probably closer to 5,000.
5,000.
Oh yeah. If you look at the broad coalition of groups that are doing this work.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting, because I try to show to international audience how much people you must to engage to have result. Because some people engage 20 volunteers and said, oh, okay, we will change legislation with 20 volunteers, which pretty harsh. We're moving to Mr. Blank, and I know that Mr. Blank also have some interesting information for us about his perception on very important issues on advocacy on Israel and Ukraine and how it works and how it's important here in DC. We have pretty shortage of time. We have 10 minutes for all to be in schedule. So let's move forward to your issue, Ukrainian and Israel advocacy. And I have a question: is it effective for now? Because for me it's also very important. But is this advocacy effective, or it's more very popular issue for media, but still it needs more work to be more effective? What is your point of view?
Well, speaking as an individual, because I'm not a lobbyist, I'm a former professor and now consultant. However, I have participated in lobbying efforts, particularly on Ukraine. I've written about the war in Gaza as well, and I have family there. The two wars present, I think, numerous issues and distinctions for lobbyists. Let me start with Ukraine first. I happen to be a strong exponent of the supplemental, and in general, I think the administration has not done enough. We can talk about that offline, but the issue right now is the supplemental bill before Congress to get $60 billion in aid to Ukraine, and smaller but significant amounts to Israel, Taiwan, some other causes as well. If you notice what's going on in town, you have a very powerful, and this is an objective fact, I'm not saying it for criticism or approval, that the Israel lobby, concentrated in AIPAC, and there's also J Street, are very strong organizations. They have very strong grassroots. They are well funded, they're well supported, they have access to the media, they have access to the White House and to Congress, and there is no dispute in Congress except maybe for the progressive Democrats, about aid to Israel. That's not what's holding up this bill. On the other hand, Ukraine, though it has, I think, an extraordinarily strong case, others may challenge that, but it is not getting anywhere. And there's a fundamental difference. It's because the Ukrainian diaspora in the United States is not organized. I speak for their annual convention every year. We just had it 10 days ago here in, just up at the McCain Center. And we get distinguished scholars, former ambassadors to Ukraine, think tankers and so on. And all this is highly rewarding, informative, etc. The case for Ukraine, I think, is a strong one. They were, after all, attacked by Russia. The Russian government has made no secret of its objective to destroy the idea as well as reality of Ukraine as a nation, which corresponds to the UN definition of genocide. And I'm not exaggerating. If you look it up, I think it's in the Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 and in the law books, this is part of Lemkin's original definition. So we have a genocide that the Russians are attempting to carry out in Ukraine and to some degree have already done. Now, that should provide a strong case on its merits, but it's going nowhere. Why? Because one key reason is because the Ukrainian community in the United States, unlike that in Canada, is not organized. And as a result, it cannot make its voice heard. If I wanted to quote Karl Marx, it must be represented. It cannot represent itself. That's the problem, because there's no congressman who has to listen to grassroots complaints that if you don't vote for this supplemental, we'll remember this in November. So there's already a disconnect between these two groups. There are more, but in the interest of time, I'll leave those aside. Maybe we can get into the Q&A in there, and I'll take Kateryna's question.
About political action committee, because Israel have very famous like IGAPA, and do you think it's effective tool, because Ukraine haven't this tool, and political action committee originally like give money to elections, so it's not like direct lobbying, but a lot of people and a lot of journalists like discuss roles of political action committees, and if it's like realtors or broadcasters, it's no problem. But when it's like foreign policy, it's a big discussion. So do you think Ukraine also must have political action committee, or how?
Well, I do, and I've told the organizers of this convention that I attend every year. They ask me to speak every year, and I keep telling them, you need to follow the Israeli example, because, as I said in my earlier remarks, there's nobody opposed, as far as I can tell, except maybe some progressive Democrats, but basically there's massive support for giving aid to Israel. I'm not going to get into debate whether you like that or not, that's a different question, but that's a fact. All the controversy you hear here is about Ukraine. Why? Part of it, not the only reason, but part of it is the absence of a Ukrainian organization that can mobilize grassroots support, make an impact upon congressmen, and present what is a very strong case, in my view, to those congressmen or senators who are opposed to this, and actually bring pressure to bear on them, like, say, AIPAC can, or say the National Association of Broadcasters, or say the NAACP can, and so on. Those organizations have clout. That doesn't mean they get their way, but when they, as the old E.F. Hutton commercial said, when they speak, people listen.
Right, and Israeli diaspora is bigger than like Ukrainian diaspora. So is it connect with diaspora, or is more connect with like issues which we discussed before with grassroots campaign, when Americans care about that?
I don't think it's a question of size. I think it's a question of the will and capability to organize. I mean, AIPAC came into being in the mid-1950s. Israel became a state in 1948, and it was quickly recognized that they needed influence in Washington. And AIPAC was organized in the middle of 1950s. It took some time, as you can imagine, to get this group going. Now, AIPAC is by no means the only lobby of its type. I mean, if you follow issues in the Caucasus, as I do, the Armenian lobby is not large numerically. It's concentrated, I think, in Boston and Fresno, California, around there. There's some other pockets of large-scale Armenian settlement in the United States, but they are, to some degree, effective. There's an act that they got passed in 1993 during the first Nagorno-Karabakh war. It's called Section 907, which to this day hinders American ability to play a constructive role in the area because it basically denies the United States the ability to help Azerbaijan. Is it the right thing to do? I mean, I think it's not, but you have a lobby that has reached out to congressmen, and I think they also reached out to Senator Menendez, at least before his current troubles, and they got legislation in their favor, and that legislation is now 30 years old, but it's on the books, it's effective. So it's not a question of numbers, it's a question of organizing capability and the will to do it. And for whatever reasons, and I don't know what they are, in the United States that's not happened, but in Canada, it has. We had a Canadian foreign minister, Chrystia Freeland, who is of Ukrainian descent, and she wasn't there by accident.
Yeah, so we have time for 1-2 questions. So if somebody from audience has this question, please do so. But please represent what speaker you have a question. Because I have one question from Facebook also, so let's take one question from audience and one question from Facebook. Okay, first will be a question from Facebook. It's a question about Broadcasters Association. So it's pretty easy. What digital tools do you use usually for advocacy, and how you use your digital tools in contact with decision-making people? I think I will add something to that. Like, if you legislative assistants, which you work, right, chief of staff, you have hundreds of emails.
Yes.
And obviously all people use like constant contact and like letters to social media. So I think this question about how to be one from these thousands of letters and use digital to be effective. So it's maybe a question to you as a like chief of staff, ex-chief of staff.
Oh, I love that question.
Yeah.
Because I did get thousands and thousands of letters. And thinking about, on the Hill, how we used to organize how many letters or how many social media hits that we got, it would be quantitative about the numbers. And then when we hit a certain threshold, that's when we would talk to the congresswoman, hey, we're having a lot of inquiries about X, Y, and Z issue. We need to move on this or figure out how we're going to do something. Now that I'm on the outside, on a broadcaster standpoint, we do have a great public affairs department. And so they help come up with toolkits for our members, so for local broadcasters to be able to advocate for issues with their members of Congress. Those toolkits include social media posts. It includes draft letters that they can send to their members of Congress. And then also the in-house lobbyists like myself, we also help with prepping them for some of their meetings when they talk to members of Congress.
But with broadcasters, it's a little easier because nobody wants to not listen broadcasters because it's pretty.
I wish it was that way.
Yeah. No, I think it's anyway some brand, yeah. But maybe we will ask also Mrs. Mallory about that, because when you work with grassroots campaign, it's smaller organizations. Mm-hmm. So what digital tools you usually use? So all your volunteers send these letters, or
all the usual suspects. But nothing works as well now that we are out of COVID as being in person and being in legislators' spaces and talking with them. In Virginia, you're able to get a lot closer to members than probably would on Capitol Hill, meaning that here in DC, the members are moving. I think somebody said earlier, our members are more overscheduled now than what they ever have been. Whereas in Virginia, you can actually come to the state capitol, get in the building, and sit in committee meetings and ask questions and talk to members. You can grab them afterwards and you can engage. We're one of the few legislatures that it actually has open testimony in committee meetings, where we can go and you can speak. You don't get long, but at least you can go and you can be heard. There is nothing like face-to-face. Now, in regard to digital, we're using all the usual suspects. We have to use social media, old-fashioned phone calls. You all can see right now how phone calls and the TikTok thing are affecting Capitol Hill. Phone calls still work. And then also, again, emails and then in-person visits with your member.
Thank you. So the same tool as worked 3,000 years, from first democracies, personal meetings, it still works, I see. So I think we must discuss more classical tools, which became really classical. Thank you so much for your time, and we will move into the next panel.